Beach FM, locals talking to locals.
Well, it's nice to welcome into the studio this morning John Kennedy from the Kapiti Aviation Museum. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Nigel.
That month's gone quickly, isn't it?
Is someone speeding them up? I think there's an underlying message in all this.
Great stuff. Yeah. How's the Aviation Museum going?
Oh, it's ticking along, Nigel. Yep. Yes, it's got its annual general meeting coming up. I think it's Saturday the 26th.
Oh, good.
9:30 for a cup of tea, and at 10 o'clock they've got the CEO of Kapiti Airport coming along as a speaker. So the members, if you haven't marked in your diary, members of the Museum of Aviation, 26th, Saturday the 26th, 9:30. Be nice to see you all there.
9:30 and 10 o'clock's the guest speaker.
Yeah.
We might find out. We've been trying to get hold of Chatham's Air to find out what the progress is, but we've had no response over the last 3 days.
They could be in organisational mode, who knows? You know?
Well, that's right, yeah.
They're not going to show their hand.
They might not have come to any. We just sort of wanted an update because it's gone quiet, isn't it? You haven't heard anything, have you?
Not a thing, no. Maybe I've got my ear to the wrong door.
Fair enough too. All right, so this Museum Aviation AGM on Saturday the 26th, 10 a.m. Get along and enjoy it. That's at the Aviation Museum?
That's right, yes.
Okay.
Diagonally opposite the old control tower.
Yes, that's
which
right.
Which is now a piece of history. That's another subject for another day, I'm sure.
Okay, good. What are we talking about today, John?
Well, it's a bit of a genesis, really. A bowling friend of mine has lent me a book, and it's about, the title of it is The Wright Brothers. It's written by a fellow by the author's David McCulloch, and he's a Pulitzer Prize winner, not of this book, but the one that he got the Pulitzer Prize was John Adams, which is a former president, of course,
right,
way back.
Yep.
Some of the neon lights, if you like, people have said concise, exciting and fact-packed by Janet Maslam from the New York Times, captures the marvel of what the Wrights accomplished and, just as important, the wonder felt by their contemporaries, Roger Lowenstein, the Wall Street Journal. A story that resonates with anyone who believes deeply in the power of technology to change lives. Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google. So that's a pretty strong recommendation. So what I did was Googled it, the Encyclopedia of Google.
Google, yes. Yeah.
People use that as a doctor now these days.
That's right.
I'm told, yeah.
Doesn't cost much.
No. Oh, well, I think that's been reduced to some,
that's right.
From what I can gather. So I unearthed a bit, and some of it I'd like to share with you. It's primarily I've centred on Wilbur Wright, and that's no slight on Orville, but it's just fascinating. He was born on April the 16th in 1867. He's under the same star as me, that fella. near Millville, Indiana. He was the middle child in a family of five children. His father, Milton Wright, was a bishop in the Church of the United Brethren in Christ. His mother, Susan Wright, as a child, Wilbur's playmate was his younger brother Orville, who was born in 1871. But Milton Wright's preaching took him on the road frequently and often brought back small toys for his children. In 1878, brought back a small model helicopter for his boys. Made of cork, bamboo and paper and powered by a rubber band to twirl its blades, the model was based on a design by the French aeronautical pioneer Alphonse Pénaud. And fascinated by the toy and its mechanics, Wilbur and Orville would develop a lifelong love of aeronautics and flying. Yeah. Wilbur was a bright and studious child and excelled in school. His personality was outgoing and robust, and he made plans to attend Yale University after high school. And in the winter of 1885-86, an accident changed the course of Wilbur's life. He was badly injured in an ice hockey game when another player's stick hit him in the face, and I think he actually lost a lot of teeth. I think what I know of ice hockey, it's still fairly dangerous. Yes. So most of his injuries healed. The incident plunged Wilbur into a depression, and he did not receive his high school diploma, cancelled plans for college and retreated to his family's home. And Wilbur spent much of this period of time reading books in his family's library, and from what I can gather, the family library was extensive, and caring for his ailing mother. And Susan, his mother, Susan Wright, died in 1889 of tuberculosis. In 1889, the brothers started their own newspaper. I'm just sort of staggered. This is the stuff I didn't know about, the West Side News. And Wilbur edited the paper and Orville was the publisher.
Wow.
The brothers also shared a passion for bicycles. And if we get the time, I'm going to talk about Richard Pierce briefly, just as a little bit of comparison. Bicycles came into his scenario as well. A new craze that was sweeping the country. In 1892, Wilbur and Orville opened a bike shop, fixing bicycles and later selling their own designs. So I don't know whether the world of aviation been all that impressed, saying that their future was all galvanised around bicycles, but never mind. Developing the aeroplane, always working on different mechanical projects and keeping up with the scientific research, the Wright brothers closely followed the research of the German aviator Otto Lilienthal. When Lilienthal died in a glider crash, the brothers decided to start their own experiments with flight. Determined to develop their own successful design, Wilbur and Orville headed to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, known for its strong winds. It was just miles and miles of sandhills and lots of winds, and of course they were gliding initially, so you'd leap off the top of a sandhill and glide down. So I think, really what developed was putting an engine on that so it could actually take off without leaping off the top of a sandhill, is the way I interpret that. So Wilbur and Orville set to work trying to figure out how to design wings for the flight. And the interesting thing that they did was they were watching birds and how they actually worked, you might say. And I think a lot of the observation of birds translated later into getting their aeroplane into the air. They observed that birds angled their wings for balance and control and tried to emulate this, developing a concept called wing warping. They were warping a wing, and what actually happens now in any aeroplane today they're called ailerons, but they warp the wing to get the same effect. The Wright brothers found that the magic formula when they added a movable rudder, and on December 17, 1903 they succeeded in flying the first free controlled flight of a power-driven aeroplane. An extraordinary achievement. Wilbur flew the plane for 59 seconds over a distance of 852 feet.
Wow.
Now, I've got a little bit out of this book that puts that in a little bit more detail. Orville now positioned himself on his stomach at the controls, as Wilbur had, while Wilbur stood to the right of the tip of the lower wing, ready to help keep the machine in balance as it started down the track. Well, the track they actually had was 4x2s with a metal lining on the top of them, and they whistled off down this track. Minutes passed while the engine warmed up, and the engine's another point. These guys built their own engines. I mean, how many manufacturers do this? Well, there are engine manufacturers, and from what I can gather, and the same with Richard Pierce, he built his own engine, and they were bright enough to use aluminium as the block, lighter rather than the cast iron sort of thing. So the engine warmed up, and as they later emphasised, neither had any previous acquaintance, a bit like you, or me anyway, jumping in the cockpit of a Tiger Moth and going out to fly it without an instruction. So amazing, really. So they had no previous acquaintance with the conduct of the machine and its controlling mechanisms, although they'd designed it and built it, but they've never tried it. Exactly 10:35, Orville slipped the rope restraining the flyer, and it headed forward, but not very fast because of the fierce headwind, and Wilbur, his left hand on the wing, had no trouble keeping up. At the end of the track, the flyer lifted into the air, and Daniels, one of their friends, who had never operated a camera before, but they'd purchased a camera to give it to Wilbur, snapped the shutter to take what would become one of the most historic photographs of the century. The course of the flight, in Orville's words, was extremely erratic. The flyer rose, dipped down, rose again, bounced and dipped again like a bucking bronco when one wing struck the sand. The distance flown had been 120 feet, less than half the length of a football field. The total time airborne was approximately 12 seconds. Were you scared, Orville would be asked. Scared, he said with a smile. There wasn't time. It was only a flight of 12 seconds, he would also stress later, and it was uncertain, wavy, creeping sort of a flight at best, but it was real flight at last. The machine was picked up and carried back to the starting point, after which they all took a short break to warm up inside the camp. It was freezing conditions in this site at Kitty Hawk where they were. At about 11 o'clock, the wind having eased off somewhat, Wilbur took a turn and went off like a bird, inverted commas, for 175 feet.
Wow.
Orville went again,
flying
200 feet. Then near noon on the fourth test, Wilbur flew a little over half a mile through the air in a distance of 852 feet over the ground in 59 seconds. It had taken 4 years. They had endured violent storms, accidents, one disappointment after another, public indifference or ridicule, because most of the public thought they were a couple of nutters, and clouds of apparently the place, Kitty Hawk, was plagued with mosquitoes, particularly summer clouds of them.
Yes.
To get to and from their remote sand dune testing ground, they'd made 5 round trips from Dayton, which was their hometown. And of course, there was one other trip that they made in addition to that, return home to see about a stronger propeller shaft, one of which they broke. A total of 7,000 miles by train, all to fly more than half a mile, no matter they had done it. Yeah. So this book is compelling. I'm only about 2/3 the way through it, but it's really holding my attention. But the Wright brothers soon found that their success was not appreciated by all. Many in the press, as well as fellow flight experts, were reluctant to believe the brothers' claims. In fact, they were still considered they weren't believed. Yeah. As a result, Wilbur set out for Europe in 1908, where he hoped he would have more success convincing the public and selling aeroplanes. Once they got to France, Wilbur found a much more receptive audience, but even there it took time. He had to do a lot of flights, demonstration flights, to win them over. There he made many public flights and gave rides to officials, journalists and statesmen. And in 1909, Orville joined his brother in Europe, as did their younger sister, Catherine, who was very supportive. I think it was a family of 5 all told, but those 3 were really instrumental in getting the whole thing going. 1909, Orville joined his brother in Europe, as did the younger sister Catherine, and the Wrights became huge celebrities there, hosted by royals and heads of state and constantly featured in the press. And the Wrights began to sell their aeroplanes in Europe and then returned to the United States in 1909. And I think what jostled the Americans along was the fact that the French military were interested in the aeroplane.
Right, yes, yeah.
So the brothers went on to become wealthy businessmen, filling contracts for aeroplanes in both Europe and the United States, and today the Wright brothers are considered the fathers of modern aviation. But the 2 brothers always took a shared credit for their innovations. No one was trying to outdo the other at all, and they maintained a very close relationship throughout their lives. And behind the scenes, however, there was a division of labour. With his very sharp instincts, Wilbur was the business mind and executive of the operation, serving as president of the Wright Company. But of course, you will be well aware that the 1 or 2 people around in New Zealand would suggest to us all that a fellow called Richard Pearce was up in the air before them.
Yes, I was going to ask you that. Does it explain that at all in the book?
No, he's not mentioned, but I just thought, well, we've got our own pioneer who was allegedly first to get in the air ahead of the Wright brothers, but what I've researched so far would seem to say that's not quite true, and that came from the mouth, supposedly, Richard Pearce himself. But his first patented invention was dated in 1902, and it was an ingenious new style of bicycle. Here we go with bicycles again. Yeah. Bamboo frame. I wonder if they thought about these days. My bike was made of bamboo, doesn't appeal to me. Bamboo frame with a vertical drive pedal action, a rod and rack gearing system, back pedal rim brakes, and integral tyre pumps. They could pump itself up while it was going. I think some of these bike manufacturers around ought to go back and have a look. But flying, not cycling, was his dream, and through the popular magazine Scientific American, Pearce kept in touch with experimentation overseas. There is evidence that he was working on ideas for powered flight from 1899 and built his first 2-cylinder petrol engine by 1900. This sort of thing staggers me, the innovation of these sort of people. It takes me back to my school days at dear old Marlborough College way back. There were bright beggars around. I had one friend. Do you remember Sturmey Archer gears and bikes? 3-speed sort of thing.
Yes,
there. Well, they had a planetary sort of thing in the rear hub, and this guy could pull it to pieces and pull it back again. I mean, if I pulled it to pieces, it would still be in pieces, wondering where every event went. But not those are the sort of fellas that excel at that. So he then constructed, using bamboo, tubular steel, wire and canvas, a low aspect ratio monoplane. Monoplane, not to the right ones, it was a biplane.
Biplane, yeah.
It was a prophetic design. It closely resembled a modern microlight aircraft in appearance, and after considerable taxing on his farm paddock, Pearce made his first public flight attempt down Main Waitoa Road, adjacent to his farm. After a short distance aloft, perhaps 50 yards, he crashed on top of his own gorse fence. And that's the part that I've always read about. I was a failure. Yes. In fact, I do remember that the late Doug Patterson, the former general manager, had asked NAC engineers to have a look at his plans and the aeroplane airplane and to consider whether it would fly. Well, the engineers suggested that it wouldn't, but who knows? No details were recorded by Pearce or onlookers of his tentative flight, and 2 letters published in 1915 and 1928, the inventor writes of February or March 1904 as the time when he set out to solve the problem of aerial navigation. He also states that he did not achieve proper flight and did not beat the American brothers Wilbur and Orville Wright, who flew on 17 December 1903.
Yes.
However, a good deal of eyewitness testimony, able to be dated circumstantially, suggests that 31 March 1903 was the likely date of his first flight attempt. 31 March 1902 also has its advocates. Pearce continued his flying experiments, achieving several further powered takeoffs or long hops, most of them witnessed. None of them in terms of length or control was a true flight by any strict definition. In July 1906 he patented his aircraft. Well, if you compare that with the Wright brothers, they were doing figure eights and circles and goodness knows what, and I get the impression from, and I haven't studied enough about it, I get the impression he might have lifted off, but he didn't really have the control that the Wright flyer had. No. So whether or not Pearce flew in any acceptable sense, and regardless of the exact date, his first aircraft was a remarkable invention. This staggered me, embodying several far-sighted concepts: a monoplane figuration, which is ahead of the Wright flyer, wing flaps. Remember what the Wright brothers were doing? They were wing warping, but he had wing flaps, or ailerons, as we'd probably more correctly call them now, and a rear elevator, which he embodied. He had a tricycle undercarriage. I mean, this is getting pretty modern, doesn't it? With steerable nose wheel and a propeller with variable pitch blades driven by a unique double-acting, horizontally opposed petrol engine. Well, that really is staggering. We all know about horizontally opposed engines. Think Volkswagens and Subarus and Porsches even. I think they have them as well.
Right.
But when you look at that, way ahead of their time, they really were, and they were considered by most. Pearce certainly was. I think he died in an asylum, unfortunately then. And the Wright brothers were considered nutters, and really they'd flown in 1903, and it wasn't until 1908, 1909 that they were actually recognised by America as actually having done it.
Amazing.
So what's happened now? That was 1903. Look at aeroplanes now.
Yeah, that's dead right. So we'll be satisfied now that the Wrights were the first to fly.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. John, I'm glad you've satisfied that. I'll be able to sleep well tonight.
Going flying, are we?
Oh, that's interesting stuff. So that book, you've got a fair bit to do yet on it.
Yes, I have, yeah.
That's where we come up with some other pieces of interest for us.
We could do it when I get further down.
Good on you.
Yeah.
Okay, John, thanks for your time this morning. And just to repeat that the Museum Aviation AGM is on Saturday the 26th, 9:30 in the morning, and 10 a.m. as a guest speaker. He's the Chief Executive of the airport, is he?
That's right, Robert Binney.
Robert Binney.
Yeah.
So get along and enjoy that. And meet up with John. If you have not met with him, he'll be able to fill you in on all the missing gaps in our aviation history.
106.3 Beach FM.